Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Paint Pod. My name is Sarah Hodgkins. I am a muralist working under the name Charlotte Designs, and now, of course, a podcaster. A very warm welcome to the Paint Pod, where we dive into the vibrant world of art through chatting to amazing artists about their life and their work. Today, my guest is the wonderfully talented Ellie Kerr-Smiley, who paints portraits of women that tell a story. And so today we're going to get Ellie to share her story, and a very warm welcome to Ellie.
Thank you very much for having me, Sarah.
Very exciting. Now, I always start off with like a bit of a silly question, really, but this feels a bit more serious than silly, really. So you're based out of Greenham near Newbury, I believe.
Yes.
And when I think of Greenham Common, of course, I'm a woman of a certain age. I think of those amazing women who camped out there for, 10 plus years, campaigning to get rid of all the American nuclear weapons off of British soil. How does that sort of women empowerment thing, how does that feed into, are you aware of that when you're sort of living and working in the area?
The true irony of all of this, Sarah, is that I haven't lived in this area for very long, and when I got my studio at the base, I had never heard of Greenham or any history whatsoever.
That's because you're so young.
Oh, well, I wish I was as young as, I have a baby face, so I'm older than I appear, but I was just terribly ignorant, I suppose, and I didn't live around here, so I had never really heard of it.
No.
And it was actually my next door neighbour that mentioned it to me in passing. I did some Googling, but I was already kind of half moving myself into the studio at the time. So I was sort of going around kind of pretending that I knew what everyone was talking about, and then slowly trying to do some research. And then the base actually put on an amazing exhibition downstairs at the same place where my studio is, all about the Women's Peace Camp there, a photography exhibition from one of the women who was in the camp. And her name's completely escaped my memory, which is terrible, but I'm sure it'll be in all the base's archives. But yes, so I actually learned a lot just from being there and going through those photographs in that exhibition and learning that way. So I think it's terribly ironic and very fortunate in a way that my work really kind of ties itself into all those ideas about empowerment and women's voices and women's agency. It all has very fortunately sort of tied itself in.
Absolutely. And when I saw where you were based, I thought that you'd perhaps done this on purpose and that this was all tied in. In fact, you could tell people that. No one would know.
I wish I were that clever. Maybe I'll start doing that. Yeah.
Because it all ties up so beautifully.
Yeah.
So as we've already mentioned, you paint predominantly women, although I did notice there were one or two men that sneaked in there.
Very occasionally. Usually if I'm being paid by someone to paint that man, or if it's my husband.
That's acceptable. And when I was reading your website, one of the things that you mentioned, and I thought this was really interesting, is that really throughout history, women have been painted by men for men. And as a result, the vast majority of the female portraiture that we see, both, day to day on Instagram and whatever, and of course, what's hanging up in the national galleries across the country, doesn't necessarily feel how we feel as women today. And it was one of the things that I really loved about both your website and, of course, your work, in that it feels very different. And I really want to explore that with you today and ask you how you kind of knit that empowerment into your portraiture.
Yeah, 100%. So this is a topic which is so layered. So do forgive me if I zip around a bit, because I have so many thoughts and feelings about all the time in the world. Perfect. So for me, it started from a place of, it was never a conscious choice to be just painting women. It was never, I woke up one day and went, this is what I'm going to do. It wasn't like that. It was more that was what felt natural to me to be making. And I've always been a massive girls girl, like all my closest friends are women, always sort of have been. And I think I started by painting my friends and then people who seemed to be my peers and faces that I knew and felt sort of connected with, because I've always sort of strived for an element of connection. in my work. I think for me, that's a big part of what portraiture is all about. It's my connection, or an artist's connection with the person they're painting, whether they know them personally or not. There's that personal sort of link in there. And the same with an audience. When I go to the National Portrait Gallery, I'm forming my own connections with the paintings I'm seeing. So I think it started from a place of that. And being a woman myself, I think being able to put almost like an extra level of humanity to the women I'm painting, which sounds silly.
No, not at all.
I think that's almost what was there. And I think I was very much conscious of, I was painting women who really exist. And these aren't people who are fictional. And these aren't people that exist in that vacuum of me painting them. They don't just exist in the snapshot, in the image was taken, the photograph or what have you, or when I'm sitting with a sitter or something like that. They don't exist in that time frame. They have these huge lives and these huge complexities and these levels to them, these contradictions and everything else that I think has been so kind of misaligned over the sort of artistic canon for women and depictions of women. And I kind of wanted to make it very aware that these women not only exist outside of where I'm painting them and they have these huge lives, but also that they are an active participant in this painting. They are not there to be serving anybody. They are not there to look like anything for anyone. They are a part of this process as much as anyone else, as much as me, as much as a viewer. They are part of that. And I think something that I get a lot when people come into my studio at the base, they kind of come up, and it is a certain demographic of people, which gender-wise, I'm sure you can figure it out, who come in and they go, oh, well, you've not painted them to be pretty. And I go, well, that's never been something I've ever considered. It never has once crossed my mind. And I'm still trying to work out what to say to people when they say that to me, because it's never been a factor in my brain whether these women are conventionally attractive to whomever's going to look at them. They are a person to me. I am painting them because they're a person and they're a woman, and I paint women. And I was interested in them for whatever reason. It might just be that I liked that image, that they're someone I know, what have you. And I think it's really interesting that we see or expect, maybe, even on subconscious levels, women to be catering to our gaze for a certain extent. I think we go, oh, well, they look pretty or they don't look pretty. And I'm thinking, well, why do they have to be anything?
Exactly.
It just doesn't quite compute with me, because we don't go to the National Gallery and look at a portrait of a man and go, well, he doesn't look very handsome. Like, that's never, or perhaps I don't, that's never been something that's come through my head. It's just, that's a cool painting. Wow, look at those painting techniques. I'm sure he was a great person. I don't know. You know, and I don't do it in that way. And I don't think a lot of people do when we look at depictions of men. We might, if he's particularly handsome, say, oh, isn't he a handsome chap, I guess? I don't, maybe. Exactly. But I don't think it's something that ever naturally occurs to us. But we see depictions of women, and one of the first things that comes to our head is, well, she isn't attractive enough, or she doesn't look attractive enough. Or even people say this to me like a compliment and say, isn't it so great? You're not trying to make them look pretty. And I think, well,
it's a strange thing to say.
Yeah. And I understand that that's coming from a place of, and many times coming from a place of perhaps, rah, we're not, you're not making it look pretty. Isn't that great? And I'm like, cool. But that's very like intro level to everything. I think, why is that even I just don't get it. No, and I don't know why women have to be there to serve people. And I think that's maybe where this whole reaction to sort of historical canon has come in for me, where you'll see paintings of women sort of with their tops off looking longingly in the moonlight, as if that's what any of us do with our time. It just baffles me. I'm like, no woman was actively involved in the creative process here, other than perhaps being a model who wasn't perhaps not, a voice in this. Or maybe she was, I can't speak to it, but I think it just baffles me.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? And I think, first of all, pretty is subjective. So what one person would consider pretty, the other person might not. I would say there's probably also a difference between what men find attractive and what women find attractive in another woman.
Yeah.
And I think women generally find attractiveness in the whole person. It's not just how they look. That might be a factor. but there's a whole raft of other stuff. How do they dress? How do they carry themselves? What sort of sense of humor do they have? We, as females, are interested in that, and that plays a big part in the attractiveness of that person, whether they're male or
100%.
female or whatever. And I think for me, that's why your portraiture is so interesting. I mean, I wrote a little comment here in that you've talked about the relationship between the sort of sitter and the artist, and we're going to explore more about the process of how you create your artwork in a moment. When I look at a lot of your paintings, I see women knowing. There's always they know something that I don't. And whether that's a happy thing or a sad thing or an interesting thing depends on the portrait. But for me, there is stuff going on in that face, in that person that I don't know about, that I want to know about.
100%. I think for me, that's how I feel about all people. I'm so interested in just getting to know people. That's always been what I need to do. I need to talk to people and learn about people, and that's my thing. I can't be isolated. I can't work on my own. I need to speak to people and learn more about them. And I think for me that comes into my work. And again, these women don't exist in this vacuum. There's all these things going on in their lives that we will never know about, that myself as the artist will never know about, and certainly then the viewers won't know about. But we can kind of pick things apart. And this idea of kind of embedded narratives and storytelling is very interesting to me. But more so than that, the idea of hidden stories is very interesting to me. And this idea that once I've completed a painting, it's no longer, the story behind it no longer really belongs to me anymore. That's for you, that's for a viewer, that's for someone else to extrapolate on and to speculate on and to pull things out of. And I can lay in clues, particularly if it's a self-portrait, which I do one of a year and no more than that, because it's too much. But I can hide things in there. But that doesn't, it's whether or not I've intentionally put something into a portrait of myself or to anybody, it's almost irrelevant at the end. It's what stories or ideas or themes you are pulling out of it. And I think that's kind of how we experience everybody we come into contact with. And that for me comes just back to why I'm so interested in portraits and the fact that they are people. They're not just objects or faces or images. No. I think that's what it all comes back to for me.
And do you need to get to know your sitters? Do you need to spend time with them and find out a little bit about them as a person before you can paint them?
So actually, funny enough, not necessarily. So if I'm painting somebody that I know, that's great. But I then find that I actually almost start second guessing myself when I do that. And I start putting all these things into it, going, well, I know that they wouldn't like this, or I know they feel awkward or sensitive about that, or I know they've got insecurity about X, Y, and Z. And I find my process gets a little bit hindered by that in some ways, because I'm too busy in my head with it. The best thing for me is when I'm painting like a professional life drawing model, or there's this great resource called Canyo, which is basically a giant group chat with about 2,000 portrait artists in it from all around the world, and they all send each other images. And the idea is that they're royalty free, and you just go for it and make what you will. So I spend hours every week sort of trawling through this for an image that sort of captures my attention. And as time goes on, a lot of these artists I do kind of get to know bits about them, but actually it's more about what am I learning in this instance, without trying to flood my brain with too much information. And part of that secrecy, I think, is quite interesting. Again, I can kind of imbue my take on these things, a little bits of information that I have. But also this model's got all these things going on that I don't know about. And then that feeds back into this interpretation that then comes almost third hand from a viewer then of this painting and what their experience on that process and down that line is. It also helps that that keeps things kind of fresh. I think when I am painting people that I know or people that are local to me, things become a little bit homogenous. I think as a white woman in her late 20s, very close to her 30s, I think everyone, all my friends, all of my friends are white women in their late 20s, early 30s, who look and sound like me. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's where I grew up. And that's, you know, you make friends with people you go to school with in uni and so on and so forth. But that's also localized. And I think when we stay in those little bubbles, not only does that not benefit ourselves as people, I think that isolates us, but also in the context of just art itself, I think that then perpetuates the kind of representation of very certain types of people. And what I want are people from everywhere to be represented in art, not just my art, but all art. And I want artists from everywhere to be represented too. But when it comes to my own process, I'm as cautious as I can be to find models from wherever I can. And it's part of the reason that I very rarely paint celebrities or things like that, because they've got enough representation. And again, for the most part, these celebrities are very certain and narrow depictions of what we deem acceptable, particularly for women. And I think
they execute a massive control over it, don't they? So
exactly, it's so curated. And I want actual real life people to be painted, and people from the other side of the world, and people whose experiences are so different from mine for whatever reason that might be. That's what I'm really interested to do. And I think as a portrait artist, for me, I can't speak for anybody else, but I feel that's almost a responsibility that I have, to try and stop myself from getting sucked into very narrow views of who can be represented.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. That's really interesting. I could talk to you about this all day. However, we should move on to some other topics, perhaps. Talk to me a little bit about where this all started then. You've mentioned that you moved to Greenham recently. So where were you born and brought up? Where in the country do you herald from?
All over the south. So born in Suffolk, lived in London, then lived in South Hampshire for majority of my education was South Hampshire. So I think what I saw classes childhood is probably from about 7 up. So that's where I was. So I lived in a little town near between Winchester and Southampton.
Yep.
So down that sort of way. Nice area, very sleepy, very quiet. Went to the local state comprehensive. It was fine. And I think I was very fortunate that it was a sleepy little town and no one there could get into any trouble doing anything. I think my mother probably thinks I was quite a rebellious child, but the worst thing I ever did was stay up late doing my homework because I was a massive teacher's pet. To this day, I would love nothing more than to be given a bit of homework and be told I did a good job. Maybe that's why I use Instagram so much, just for like the validation.
So how did art feature in your upbringing? Have you got someone in your family perhaps that is creative?
So my dad is a massive drawer, always has been. He was always doodling on everything. I remember vaguely being very young and him doing a couple of paintings every now and then, very small scale kind of still life sort of things. But that wasn't a common occurrence because they both worked and money was really tight. So they didn't have time to do lots of fun things. They were off working and I was looking after my little sister and doing all sorts of things. So art was always something that was, I sort of saw it in my dad's margins of his notebooks. And my grandmother was, she enjoyed painting as well, but we weren't particularly close, so we didn't see her very often. But whenever I did, she might draw something. I might have seen a watercolor painting she'd done. But so there was definitely a familial link, but it wasn't like I grew up with artists or something like that. But I did have massive support from my parents to pursue art, in that, I mean, I never saw art as being something that could be pursued. But I think my mother always kind of wistfully said, like, I wish you'd gone to art school. I wish you'd done this. I wish you'd done that. Because you were ever so clever and whatever else.
Like good mums say.
Just all good mums say. I mean, she's also my biggest critic in the entire world. And she would love me just to paint a nice landscape. But that's what mums do.
Yeah, absolutely. I did the same with mine.
Yeah, but she did always sort of say, you should do something with this. And I never really quite believed it was a possibility. So I did art GCSE at school, and I will say I had a brilliant GCSE teacher called Miss Barlow, who I wish I could track down as an adult and just be her friend, because she was so great. And then I went to sixth form. So down in Hampshire, schools finish at 16 and you go off to a separate sixth form college. So I went there and I did A-level arts. And without seeming too critical, that's what killed art for me.
You're not the first person to say that, I'm afraid to say.
I just felt so regimented and stagnant to me. And the kind of things that I wanted to do and explore and push weren't within those narrow guidelines of what an A-level board need. And I think that perhaps the teachers there you're in and out so quickly. You're only there for 2 years. They go, right, all these students just need to hit boom, 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 these targets and get out the other side. And they're doing their job as best they can, I'm sure. But artistically, I thought, God, this is sad. And also, I was a massive teacher's pet. So I did 5 A-levels rather than 3 because I'm insane. And I was just mental. And I remember one night staying up past my bedtime, doing my art coursework under the covers in my bedroom so I wouldn't get in trouble for being awake still. And the next morning I went into college having not slept, doing an English mock exam, wiping my nose and seeing a lot of blood on my hands, standing up and passing out. And it's because I just was doing too much. I wasn't sleeping and I just pushed myself too far. And I kind of thought at that point, right, enough is enough. I don't love this. I don't even like this. No. I certainly don't want to pursue this at any kind of higher education level. And also, I've been told my whole life that being an artist wasn't a job. You had to be in the past and you had to be an old man, you had to be dead. And that's it. That's when you get famous. And you can only make a living as an artist if you're famous. So I thought, well, I can't fulfill any of those criteria. So...
And where did that come from? Because you've said your parents were actually quite encouraging. So where did that message come from?
I think it came from school as a big kind of starting point of it. I think we were sort of told that if you want to pursue something creative, you go into graphic design. And I did do some graphic design work experience and I didn't love it. As you and I spoke about before the podcast, technology is not my my strong suits. Didn't like it. And so I thought, well, that's not right. And even my parents, who were supportive of me doing something with art, said, if you want to make some money, Els, you've, kind of got to figure out a clever way of doing it. And at which point I'd kind of given up on the idea of it anyway. And life sort of moved on, really. And I just think that there was such a lack of representation of artists who actually existed. I don't think I ever met what I would class as a quote unquote real life working artist until I was one.
Gosh, that's actually quite scary, isn't it, when you think about it?
It really, and I think that's part of why what the base do where my studio is so important, because we get kids coming in all the time, like in schools, on school trips, but also with their parents, and going, oh my gosh, look, that's an actual artist. And I think being a younger woman as well, I think I see these lights light up in little girls' eyes, and they can kind of relate to me, and they can go, oh, look, there's an actual lady doing this. I could do this. And I sort of think, had I seen that growing up, I might not have wasted such a great deal of my time. I hesitate to say waste because I don't think
it's not a waste.
I may not be here if I hadn't had the other life experiences I had, but I could have made so much else.
But you're right, and I do a lot of work with a couple of charities where I go into schools and just talk about what it is that I do, and I don't do anything particularly, amazing. All I do is tell them I'm an artist, I make a good living, and you can do the same if that's something that you want to do, and give them the opportunity to ask me questions about, how I do it and all these sorts of things. And I'm actually hoping that kids, maybe teenagers rather than kids, will listen to this podcast as well and actually get to understand that there are lots of routes to becoming a professional artist and that you can make a very nice living out of it and have a great life, and you don't have to be dead or male.
Yeah, exactly. I always sort of say to people, and it sounds a bit facetious, but I say, I'm not a particularly special person, no more so than anybody else is. I'm not, a miracle person. I'm just a person who decided one day that she'd had enough of working at a law firm where she was miserable and decided to do something else. And, you know, I work very, very hard, but also I think it's an absolute priority to me to be happy. I've spent enough of my 20s not being happy, doing things for other people and not getting anything out of it. So prioritizing that and going, see, I can do it. If I can do it, you can do it.
Anybody can.
I think it's so important.
Completely agree. And you've just kind of alluded to my next question, which was having dismissed art at that sort of A-level stage, it sounds like you went into law. I mean, hello.
I know. So I didn't even mean to go into law, which is the mental thing. I did an English degree, and then I did a master's degree, and then I wrote my PhD thesis, and then I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll take a quick break out because I wanted to teach at an academic level. That was my goal at that point, mostly because I loved uni, and I was like, I don't ever want to leave. Real world, no thank you. But I thought, you know what? I've been in education since I was 4 years old. Before I really begin my PhD, I will take, you know, a year out and some money. And my mum was an estate agent. So I grew up in the back rooms of estate agents' offices, folding brochures and whatnot. So that's where I basically lived my childhood, wonkily folding things. And I worked for a branch of an estate agency at uni on my weekends to basically fund my way through. Yep. And they had a branch in their flagship branch in the city I was then moving to after uni. And they said, well, why don't you get a job here? And I went, great, perfect. That'll do. Quickly realized I didn't enjoy that. And I was just doing admin there, but it was just too speedy for me. I think too much high pressure too fast. And that's that industry. I actually think to an extent that maybe an office at any kind of high speed capacity would never have suited me.
No, fair enough.
But I didn't know that at the time. So I did that for a couple of years because you sort of get into the money and then it's hard to see out of it because, you know, I've now got bills to pay suddenly. Didn't have to do this before. Exactly. You know, at uni it's split between 8 housemates. now it's just me and my boyfriend. What do we do? So I decided I was sort of sick of it. And there was a solicitor's firm literally opposite my office window. And because solicitors and estate agents are kind of very simpatico, and I knew that an assistant job was becoming available, so I basically dropped my my CV through the door and got called in and got a job. And I thought, easy peasy. How difficult can conveyancing be? Yeah, learn that.
I can't imagine a worse job, to be perfectly honest. I don't think.
Oh God, it was a lot. Fast-paced and a lot of money changing hands for a lot of very stressed out people. And I again sort of got attracted to the money a little bit and thought, oh, I'm kind of a lawyer, this is fun. Legal documents, yay, this is great. And then COVID happened, and then the stamp duty holiday got brought in. So for anyone who doesn't know, that's where stamp duty, which is a big tax that you pay when you buy a house, got completely put on pause. So everybody decided, now's my chance to move house.
Yeah, of course.
I was one of very few people who didn't get furloughed at my company, which meant I was doing the workload of many people. And I hadn't even been there that long. I didn't know a lot of stuff still. And suddenly I was working from 5 a.m. to 11 at night. And I was thinking, what am I... You don't get any overtime in it because it's salary. So I was thinking, what am I doing? But when you're in that, it's really hard to see out of it. And I know that my now husband kept saying to me, Ellie, you need to just quit. But I'm like, well, to do what? To get another job? I can't even think about another job right now. I've got to do this job.
You haven't got the brain space. When you're working that hard, you don't just have the brain space to think about these things.
That's exactly it. I think it's very difficult for anyone who's not been in that position to because all my friends go, just quit, duh. And I'm like, it's not that easy.
No, it's not that easy.
In that time, I moved to this area that we live in now. My husband and I bought our first house, and we were sort of unpacking all our boxes. And I found an old packet of acrylic paints, and I hadn't painted in so many years. And I had 2 days off of work, and I thought, I'm just going to paint something today. And I did. I made a very small little portrait, and I thought, wow, that felt so natural. And I had been doing some doodling all along and doing some sketching and things just with pen and biros, because in the flat I was in previously, I couldn't afford to be splashing paint everywhere. It didn't even occur to me to do that in that tiny little box. So when I was here, I thought, well, these are my walls. I can get paint all over these, and that's fine. So that's what I did. And I thought, well, that was good. And I posted on Instagram, and it did pretty well. And I thought, oh, other people like this. That feels nice. Let me do this again. And what I started doing was, after I finished work at about 11 o'clock at night, I would close my computer down, because it was all working from home back then, pull out a sheet of paper, and I would make a very small portrait pretty much every night, just to give myself something that wasn't work. And it almost opened up this window for me, like an escape hatch for me.
Interesting.
It was like this light, and I thought, if I can make this work, I could maybe do this. People like this. And people was like, my following began to grow and grow and grow. And people were messaging me saying, is this for sale, or can you do commissions? And I was turning down that work because I was so busy with my other work. Wow. And I thought, why am I not doing this thing that I really enjoy to do that thing that I hate and that is killing me? What am I doing? So I got to the point where the stamp duty holiday was coming to a close, and I thought, I'll wait until it's finished, because I don't want to leave my colleagues in the lurch, because that wouldn't be fair on them to be another person down. So I waited until then, and I was watching my following kind of grow, and it all kind of coincided. I think I hit maybe 30-something thousand on the same day that the stamp duty holiday ended. I thought, I'm doing it. I phoned up my boss, and I went, I quit. And literally about 12 hours later, Steph, who runs the base where my studio is, emailed me and said, hey, Ellie, we've seen your work. We know you're local. We've got a studio coming up. Would you like it?
Gosh, and so it was like a coming together, wasn't it? The planets were aligning.
It was absolutely crazy. And to the point where I almost said no, because I thought, I've just quit my job. I can't afford to rent a studio. And my husband went, Ellie, you've got to just do it, because you won't get this opportunity again. And now that I'm there, I know that would not have come up again, because those studios they do not come up often. So
no, I can imagine.
I feel very fortunate that the stars kind of aligned, and it's why I'm sort of hesitant to really say that I wasted years of my life, because actually, had I not been pushed to that point, I don't know that I ever would have had the guts to do it. I think for me, they came to this point where I thought, staying here is scarier than leaving here and going into the unknown. So at that point, it's actually the sensible thing to do to go. It's to stay here forever was so terrifying. I was like, I have to go. There's nothing else I can do. I think had I been somewhere cozy and comfortable, I would have stayed there forever, because that was easy.
What an amazing story. So you've made this decision. You've rented this studio. You go in on your first day. What is the first thing you do?
The first thing I do is I fall as I'm coming up the stairs in front of everyone. I wish it wasn't true, but it is.
I love it.
I was carrying up this ginormous desk, this huge antique desk that we had. Like, we got found it secondhand, and my husband was pushing it, and I was pulling it up the stairs. Oh my goodness. And I tripped on the top step, and I just slid across like the runway. And I just sort of waved to everyone, like, "Hello, I'm Ellie. I'm here." I've entered. I remember my husband saying, he went, well, Ellie, it wasn't a good first impression, but it was an accurate one. So that was the first thing I did.
Certainly a first impression as well.
Ridiculous. But after that, I very slowly started to kind of get my studio built up. So for a long time, it was just me and a desk. Mm-hmm. And then it was me and a desk and a shelf. And then it sort of built up from there, and now it's me and so much stuff that I can barely move. As all good studios are. I was gonna say. Yeah. So that's really what I did, but it took me a while to be in there full time, because I was still working my notice, so I'd be there sort of on weekends and building my time up. And actually, ironically, one of the first things that happened to me there was I had maybe 4 paintings on my wall at that point, and a couple in the tiny little frames. And a woman walked into my studio one day with her friend, and she didn't acknowledge me. I was at my desk painting away, didn't get an acknowledgement from her. She did a spin, rolled her eyes, and then walked out. I mean, about 10 feet away from me, so I was clearly in the hearing range. And she went, I don't know why anyone would like that. And at the time, I was devastated. And I thought, what have I done? I've just quit my job. What am I doing? Now I think that's the funniest thing that's probably ever happened to me in my life.
What a strange thing to do. And
I think this is part, I think, of being a woman who's in an open space, making things and being vulnerable is criticism's a part of it, fine.
It's part of being an artist, let's be honest.
It's a big part of being an artist. But I think there is something that sometimes some people just like to put women down. But I think actually having that happen to me so early on gave me kind of the steely resolve of actually, I'm gonna keep doing this. And what do you want me to do? Like change everything I'm doing because you don't like it? No. And it's fine that you don't like it. But art isn't for everyone. And it means that this isn't for you, and that's fine. And having that interaction so early on kind of actually made me understand what the art world was like. Because I didn't know any other artists. I didn't know anybody in that art world. I didn't go to art school. I didn't know how any of it worked. And so I think I actually needed that because it just was a bubble of Instagram of people liking work and saying how good things were. So to hear that actually kind of brought me to earth a bit, sobered me up, and I went, okay, cool. I will continue to get better, but also this isn't for everyone, and that's fine.
And I think that's true. And I think as an artist, one of the first things that you do need to do, which it sounds like you did almost by accident, is to work out who your customers are, who is actually going to like my work, because there is always going to be a whole raft of people that don't like your work. And that's fine. They're never going to be your customer, so you're not talking to them anyway. But to focus on those people that you know do like your work and do appreciate what it is that you do. So how do you approach a painting? You talk about being instinctive and very unplanned in your approach to your work. Talk me through how you actually go through the process of producing one of your beautiful portraits.
So usually it begins with me finding an image I want to work from. So be that I've had someone in my studio and I photographed them myself and I'm going through my own archives, or I'm going through some life drawing sessions. So I subscribe to Draw Brighton, who release the images from the life drawing sessions and their models. So I might go through that as well. Or I'll look through Canio, basically looking for something that grabs me. So the first thing I'm doing is that really, and I have a whole album of things that I kind of want to work on and working that kind of out. So I'll pick what I want to work from, what model, what reference I'm going to be using. And usually I'll have seen something that has sparked something else in me. So I might have been out for a walk and seen some clouds that I thought, I like those colors, or those shapes are kind of cool. Or I might have watched a film and so a pattern on someone's dress has come out to me. Or I've been thinking about memory particularly, or I've been thinking about a particular moment or an idea, something along those lines. And I'm trying to work out ways in which I can visually represent these kind of ideas and these energies. And for me, it comes back to that idea of story, but story can be more than kind of a once upon a time. It can be, a story can be the color palette that I'm using, or a hidden history, or a more explicit message. It can be a lot of things, and sometimes it's many all wrapped into one. And I'm kind of working so separately from finding my image. I'm thinking about all these ideas that are kind of swimming around in my head that I kind of want to put into practice somehow. And I'll find an image and this idea that I think actually, these work great together. I can make something here. And I will put out. So I'll get my materials. So sometimes I just want to work on something small and manageable. So I might just work on paper. I actually really love working on paper. That's how I started.
Yeah, I did too.
I really enjoy it. So it might be that, or it might be, actually, I think this needs to be bigger. So I'm going to go out and source the canvas. Often what I do, because I'm very forgetful, I have a little app on my phone, the Procreate Pocket rather, and I just do a really crude finger sketch on my phone of my ideas.
Cool. Okay.
It's like, when you wake up from a dream and then you try and remember it and it's kind of slipping away from you as you try and think of it. I get the same with my ideas for work, so I've got to catch them while I can. and get them down. So I'll source my materials. I'll get out a very rough sort of sketch of the person first. So it always centers around the portrait. So that's the first thing I need to get sorted, is get out my line work. That's the easiest thing to mess up. And particularly because I'm very interested in these ideas of abstraction and whimsy and play in whatever kind of surroundings they're in, the portrait itself needs to be the thing that's refined. So I get that mapped out first. And that tends to take a good few tries. If you ever come to my studio, I'm furiously rubbing things out a lot of the time. I say a lot to people. I get a lot of, oh, well, I can't do portraits. Portraits are too hard. To which, again, I say I'm not special. Like, I'm not particularly, bright or whatever else. I'm a normal person who can just work. It's a skill like anything else. It's like riding a bicycle. I tell children, the more you do it, you get better. You ride your bike and you take your stabilizers off, and then you ride it more, and then you can go on the roads. And
absolutely right. Couldn't agree more.
But everything that I make goes through a lot of change. So I'll get a sketch out and I'll think it's good. Look at it the next day and go, oh God, that needs to move and that needs to move. And I sort that out. Once I'm vaguely happy with my kind of sketch for my portrait, I'll then move on to the background. So I like to get a sort of a good chunk of that background done really early on. I find that really helps me work out what my colours are going to be doing later on.
Yes, I get that.
And just getting that kind of vibe, that kind of idea. And again, because I really enjoy spontaneity in my process, this is the most fun part for me. Well, one of the most fun parts is I can get kind of messy now and get these ideas out and think, what am I doing? And splash and paint around and see what comes out in a really free form kind of way. But because it's so freeform, there's a likelihood of errors, which is fine. I'm a big fan of errors. But what I don't want to do is have a perfectly painted portrait and then accidentally completely mess up the background and have to throw the whole thing away.
No,
so get that background done, or at least kind of mapped out first, and get the big kind of like portions of that sort of sorted, get the ground in and everything else. Then I'll work on the portrait. So I usually start sort of face down and I work myself around. I always think of it like a puzzle. So I'm kind of putting little bits together, almost like clockwork, rather than working layer on layer on layer.
Okay, that's interesting.
So I don't know whether it's just because I have been woefully uneducated in the correct ways, quote unquote, to paint. I personally sort of believe I think the only incorrect way to make art is to not make art. I think whatever works for you is perfect.
I agree.
And what works for one person won't work for someone else. It's like handwriting. It's all different for everyone.
Yeah.
But for me, being able to map it out in small chunks, is very satisfying for me to watch that all get filled in. But also it gives me an idea of where it's going. If I know that I've made this section around the eye, I've got that done and sorted, I go, I know I can do this because see, I've done that. And it's almost like a pep talk for myself the whole way through. I don't know whether it's these ideas of imposter syndrome that come in, I think, to most artists and most people, I think, for a lot of things, of going, I can't do this. Who do I think I am? To actually go, no, see, I've done that bit, so I can do this bit, and to keep myself going. Whereas if I think about working layer on layer, I would get so lost in the mess of it. I think I'd lose all faith in myself. So I just need to give myself little reassurances as I go. Like, when if you were a kid and you revise for an exam, you give yourself a little snack or something, like a little sweetie in between each revision session as a reward. It's a bit like that. I reward myself with little chunks of painting.
No, that makes perfect sense. So you've kind of talked a little bit about this already. Your faces are beautiful. I mean, they're perfect. They're full of emotion. They're full of sensitivity. But the backgrounds are very different. Some of your paintings have very plain backgrounds. Some have very busy backgrounds. Some of them have virtually no background at all. How do you make that decision between what is going to go around each face?
So it starts usually with that idea of, what am I trying to convey here? So, for example, a piece that was recently on display in the Inside exhibition was a piece called Patience. It's probably the most recent one on my Instagram feed. Right. And I had this idea of a woman who had been just waiting patiently, but perhaps this idea of patience can be a great thing. Patience is a virtue. We say that all the time, right? Patience is great, but also if you wait too long for things, sometimes the world can kind of overtake you. And I had this idea of someone who had kind of been overtaken, rather than perhaps taking some action, or perhaps just being too patient and too complacent and perhaps too pleasing. I think something we do as women a lot, I'm talking very broadly here, but I know something that I do a lot is I placate everybody, and I'm so desperate to please everyone. But sometimes I think a lot of people do this, where we bury our own desires so far down to make sure that everything else is good.
Yeah,
but actually, when you do that, the world's not going to stop and wait for you. So I had this idea, and I knew that I wanted to do something more abstract with my surroundings, as I often sort of do. And I knew that it needed to be wild, and I knew it needed to be big, and I wanted it to have energy, almost as a contrast to her being very placid and sort of sitting there and I can't speak today.
Contemplative.
Thank
is that right?
you. Yes, exactly. So I sort of had this idea, and so basically, that's where the planning element kind of starts and ends. And then it was time for me just to get messy and free and loose. So I sketched out my portrait, and then I just went nuts with painting. So I put a big sort of pink ground down first, because I love pink and I have a big mission to reclaim pink. And then I built that up. So big sort of flat brushes. So anyone who follows my work knows that I love teeny tiny little pointed brushes. Even large scale work for portraits, I will use no bigger than maybe a 2 size brush. Wow. I love those tiny details. That's where I get stuck in. But I had these huge, big flathead brushes, and I was swiping and scraping. I had a cement scraper that I was using to carve things out. I will use whatever I can find in my shed, in my husband's toolbox. I'm going through all of that. And that's where that energy comes in, I think. So for a piece like that, it just came from these ideas first, and then that kind of experimental, spontaneous process. And that's where most things come in. And there are some times when I want to make a piece that's quieter, in a sense, when actually I think a white background will do perfectly. And it's more about how perhaps just the portrait and the page will kind of interact with each other. Sometimes that's enough, and sometimes not pushing things too far is actually exactly what a piece needs. So I'm trying always to sort of listen to my gut instinct on that a little bit as well, which is hard because I always want to push things a bit too far. But yeah, it really just depends, I suppose, on my mood, but also what kind of ideas I've got floating around at any given time.
Okay, no, I mean that makes perfect sense. I'm just looking at patients on your Instagram here now. So how do you know when you have successfully captured the emotions and the ideas that you intend?
That's the true answer is I don't.
Okay.
I think a lot of people, I think self-doubt is a huge part of this, and again, that imposter syndrome we talk about. And I still feel really very new to this entire business and career. So there's a big part of me that goes, actually, I don't know for sure that I've done this right. I have to try and check in with myself and go, does this feel right to me?
Yeah.
And does this feel like it's done? And a lot of the time, the answer is maybe. I'm trying very, very hard to get better with that.
Okay.
I think once I can recognize a person in their portraits, I go, right, well, I know I've got that likeness down. Great. I can see that these are the two same people.
Yeah.
Great. And I'm never necessarily going for photorealism or
No.
an exact replication, but I can kind of see that there's a link there. And then I can think, well, I try and detach myself a little bit and go, what am I reading from this? Am I reading what I intend to be read? Great, cool. I can probably stop now. I'm technically happy with how it's been finished or how it's been put together. But I think once again, there's that sort of central piece of this whole thing of, just because I have intended something or I read something doesn't mean that's what an audience will do. I had actually with the same piece, Patience, that we're talking about, I had somebody come to see it at the gallery who didn't know that I was within earshot, and they went, God, she looks so sullen. And I thought, I don't see that at all. But again, for me, she seems very introspective. But I think that's part of the whole thing. Everybody seems and reads something differently, and I think for a lot of it that comes back to more about the person who's viewing that piece of work, which I think can be a beautiful thing and a humorous thing all at once.
Absolutely.
I get a lot of men coming into my studio who say, "Why do they all look so angry? Why do they all look so cross with me?" And I'm like, "I don't think they look cross with you at all, but if that's what you're reading, sir, maybe there's something that's happening here."
That comment alone says an awful lot. And, we said right at the very beginning that pretty and attractive are subjective, just like Patience's expression on her face is subjective. And what one person will see in it is not necessarily the same as another. And there'll be lots of things that feed into that about the onlooker themselves rather than just the painting.
Yeah.
So is there someone that you go to for feedback? Who is your critique that you will listen to, or is it just you?
For the real first and foremost of it, it's me. I need to feel that I am happy with something and that I can defend something. Okay. If I feel that I am not apologizing for something, then I know I've probably done it right. The great thing about where my studio is I have 8 other artists there. So
handy.
Hearing what they say and hearing what their takes are is a big part of that as well. Even if it's just good job, great, cool. Or it's have you thought about X, Y, Z? Or actually, can we try maybe what if you lifted this or did that?
Yeah.
That's a big part of it as well. Also, again, being an open studio, my studio is open all year round. Even if I'm not there, like today, I'm here recording this, but somebody could still come past and see my studio right now. People can and will tell me their opinions. So, and there's a pinch of salt that you take with that. But also, sometimes just because you feel perhaps a bit defensive in the moment doesn't mean that it isn't good advice. But I think that's up to the individual artist to take what they think is relevant and what they think is actually constructive and what they think is nonsense. And you can kind of work that out for yourself. And that's where I kind of try and sit with myself and go, is it just that they don't like it or don't get it? Or was it that actually with, the passage of a week's time to digest this, maybe they're right. Maybe this background does need to be lighter or darker. Maybe their eye is too high up or too small. It's
true.
It's kind of taking those in, and that is the great benefit and the great downside of having the public involved in your process on a daily basis. Is you get it from everyone. So yeah.
No, I mean, I was going to say. One thing you're very good at doing as well is posting on Instagram. I mean, your Instagram is fantastic, and we'll talk about the links and that at the end. But you're very good at posting progress shots throughout the process, and because you have such a large following, people do give you feedback. Do you take that on board? Do you take that feedback, or do you not even look at it and just trust your own instincts?
Somewhere in between. A lot of the time, I'm just not looking at it because I am busy. And I just don't have the time to sit there monitoring a lot of comments. That's a big part of it. But and then another part is if I do get some feedback, I will say with Instagram, the majority feedback is, this looks great, can't wait to see more. A lot of it is very surface, which is actually, sometimes that's just really nice. Sometimes you just need a little cheerleader. And sometimes when you get someone saying, oh, have you thought about this or that or whatever? I suppose it's all in the way that it's given to you. I think that constructive criticism only really works when it's been invited. Otherwise, I think we're all human and you have that natural defense system up and you actually want to go, F you, what do you know? Particularly if it's someone behind a screen. I don't know you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's quite interesting. And sometimes I think as an artist, you will paint something and you'll know inside yourself, this is right, this is actually great and what I was trying to achieve. So actually other people's feedback in that situation is almost pointless because you have achieved what you wanted to achieve. But I think sometimes when you're not sure, when you're going, I don't know, that's when you start to invite the feedback. And sometimes that's useful and sometimes it's not.
Yeah, totally. I think that's exactly it. And art is so subjective, and everyone's experiences and expertise and abilities and opinions are so varied that you're never going to get a straight answer at the end of it from anything.
No,
So it's
true.
up to you. I think it's your responsibility as the artist to take that on board as, you know, gently as you can with yourself, and decide what you think is valid and what isn't.
How do you navigate the business side of being an artist? Dealing with clients, marketing your work. How does that work for Ellie Kerr-Smiley?
Poorly. I am not a business person at all. If I could just be a hermit, well, not a hermit, I think if I was on my own, I'd be miserable. But if I could just paint my pictures and somehow get money in my account, that would be ideal, and not have to do any kind of marketing or business or accounting ever again. I'd be very happy.
If
But
only we could.
exactly, that's not the world we live in. So I navigate it through some different channels.
Okay.
I will say the majority of it is Instagram. Instagram drives a lot of sales. It gets eyes on work.
Yeah.
Less so these days than a couple of years ago. The way that people use social media is changing so rapidly. And I can complain about it all I want, but I do the same. I don't engage with things the way I used to. We've all just been fatigued.
Yeah,
so
totally.
It's now the responsibility of artists and creatives, or anybody trying to make a business, to work out where to find people next.
Yes.
I do think at some point there'll be some new social media that will be popular, and that will be great. For the time being, Instagram is probably still my biggest driver of commissions and sales online. But also doing things in person, I think, is actually done a lot for me. So having that public studio really helps. That gets people in front of your work. Entering exhibitions is a big part of that. And again, that's something that I find quite nerve-wracking, because again, you're opening yourself up to rejection and criticism and all sorts, which I'd love to put my hands over my ears and go la la la. But trying to open myself up to that is a big part of that too. Networking with other artists and local businesses is also huge. I think had I not had the space where I do with my studio at the base publicly, I don't know that I would be making enough money to be feasible, really, because that's opened up so many channels, particularly now where Instagram's wound down a little bit from what it was. I used to be able to live off print sales alone, and now I need to be selling more originals. And I do classes as well at the base, so that helps. So a bit of tuition or group classes, which I love doing. Actually getting people into portraiture is so interesting for me. I think as British people, we have a very weird relationship with portraiture, where we're like, don't look at me, don't look at me. I don't want pictures of people on my walls, stop it. And people go, well, I don't know that person. Why would I have their picture? I'm like, well, you've not been to that beach either, like Deborah, like it's on your wall. I sort of see it as, I like this piece of work, so there. But so that's why the internet's very important for me, because that opens me up to other channels. My biggest export is the States, so I sell most of my work abroad, to America. Both commission work and private sales and prints tend to go to the US or to Australia or different parts of Western Europe. My biggest kind of exports, more so than within the UK.
That's very interesting. And I was about to say, who buys your work? I mean, you've mentioned sort of geographies, but are they individuals? Are they companies? Who is buying your work? And is it men or women?
So it is mostly my peers. So it's mostly women. So 18 to 45 is my biggest kind of category of buyers. Sometimes businesses. So I've done a few kind of book covers and things like that for different publishers. But generally it's private sales, private commissions for real people. And that for me is very special, to know that they're in these people's homes.
No, that's lovely. And you mentioned the workshops. What is it that appeals to you about teaching? I mean, so here's a little thing. I'm actually not great at portraits. Yes, I know I don't practice enough, and given a choice, I'll pick a tree or a street over a face. So tell me what it is that you love teaching about portraiture.
I think giving people the confidence in themselves to try something whether or not by the end of it they say, I want to be a portrait artist now, is almost irrelevant. That they've actually gone in and given themselves over to this experience and said, I'm actually going to try this, and that they have felt comfortable with me to do that is really special. And like you say, a lot of people say, I would rather do a tree than a portrait. I find if you want to draw a tree, I don't know where I'd start, because that's not what I do. That's not what I practice. It's the same thing. And I think being able to create an environment which is nice and is calm and is fun, the most thing is it has to be fun for people. And then going, and it's almost like each time I do a sort of group course or something with a group of adults, is I've now got X amount of people who now understand portraiture better and have a new experience with portraiture and a new understanding and appreciation of this form. And whether or not they go off to create more of their own is almost by the by. It's for me, it's opening more people up to something that I'm really passionate about and really love. And they're just fun. I always sort of say, I can't make somebody be an expert portrait artist in 5 sessions. I can't do it. I still hesitate to call myself that, and I've been doing it full time for years. So I can't make that happen. But what I can do is give someone some skills, give someone the knowledge that I've learned. And I think because I haven't learned formally through academic means for art, I can kind of put that information across in a way that perhaps might be a bit more understandable to people who haven't had an art education. And then at the end of it, at least they can leave and say, well, I had fun. And, I can make it chatty, and I can figure out what people want to do, and I can make it enjoyable and entertaining. And they go, I had a really good time, is the first thing I want to achieve. And the second is, well, now I've got a new skill.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I'm actually quite tempted myself, if I'm honest. Quite tempted. I'd like to do more portraiture, but it is a confidence thing with me. When I do them, they're all right, but I just don't do them very often.
It is.
Sorry.
But I think we sort of get in our heads that we have to create a portrait that looks like this person, exactly like this person. Whereas with a tree, we go, well, it's like a tree. And I sort of say, well, just paint a person. We'll use this as a reference to refer to, rather than this is what we have to do.
Yes, that's true. Maybe I should think about it like that. Thank you for that. So let's talk a little bit about the future now. Now, obviously, you have a particularly important project on the go, I understand, in that you are expecting your first baby.
Yes, this is my biggest project yet, longest one in the works. Actually, it's done faster than some of my paintings, actually. But
so, talk to me a little bit about how what's on the cards for you in the coming months. Obviously, baby notwithstanding. What's coming up? What can we look out for? And how do you feel having a child is going to affect the way that your art practice works?
So for me right now, what I'm trying to do artistically is I'm really trying to go back to basics a little bit. I've stretched myself very thin over the last few years, trying to do a lot of things. And I feel that in many ways, I've let my own kind of joy in the process go a little bit. I've lost that a bit in terms of being so busy going here, and now I've got this admin to do, this email to reply to, but I've got this lesson to teach, and now I've got 10 minutes to paint something, and by the time I paint this out, I've run out of time again. It's started to feel like work. What I'm actually hoping that having a child does, it will make me appreciate the time that I've got a little bit more, rather than sort of going, oh God, I've got to do some work. I can go, now I get to paint. Yay.
Yeah. That's what
I'm hoping. I'm very, very fortunate in that my husband's company is giving him a very generous amount of paternity leave. So he will be the primary parent, primary caretaker, should I say, for a while, for the first sort of 9 months or so. I mean, when I say primary, what I mean is, I suppose we will just be splitting it a bit more equally, but I will be the one who will still be working. Because being self-employed, you get diddly squat in terms of maternity pay, really. So I can earn more money doing a class a month than I would from the government. Whereas he can get his salary on paternity leave. So we'll do it that way around. So obviously things are going to change, and I will need to slow things down a little bit. And obviously I want to be home more, but I can work from home, I can work from my studio, just kind of work it out and play it by ear, I think is sort of our plan. And then once 9 months kicks in, we'll probably look into daycare. There's a nursery down the road from the studio, so I can do half days there, then have it with me. And the great thing about the studio is they're very kid friendly, so I can just hopefully bring him in with me.
That's nice.
It's really nice. It's really nice. I mean, I'm obviously being very optimistic that everything is going to go well and be healthy and everything else. Who knows? I'm trying to make sure I'm prepared for lots of outcomes.
Yes, cool.
But given that, fingers crossed, everything goes to plan. Hopefully, obviously, my time will be stretched more thinly, but I'm hoping that it will help me reprioritize things a bit.
It certainly does that. I mean, mine are grown up now, but it certainly does that. It helps you to refocus. And I think you made a good point, actually, when you have just very sort of small snippets of time that you can work in, it makes you make full use of those to the eighth degree, because you know that you're going to be back being a parent in a moment.
Yeah, exactly.
So you need to make it count. You need to make every second count. But it's a very exciting time, and I wish you all the luck, and I hope everything goes well. And I look forward to following your career going forward.
Thank you.
Well, we've probably got to the end of this interview. I don't know where time goes when I'm doing these. Honestly, it goes so quickly.
It slips away, doesn't it?
It's absolutely crazy. So I would strongly urge you to follow Ellie on her Instagram, as that's obviously where a lot of the action takes place. So it's Ellie Kerr-Smiley.
Don't worry.
And that is ELLIEKERRSMILY. And of course, you have the website where you can purchase prints and originals at oh God, I can't even talk anymore.
No, don't worry.
Smiley.com. There you go. I got there eventually. Ellie, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I hope you've enjoyed the experience of our chat amongst girls.
It's been wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for letting me prattle on. It's been brilliant.
No, thank you. You've been listening to The Paint Pod, brought to you by Charlotte Designs Murals. Please do like, subscribe, share with your friends, all those good things. It really does help. Until our next wander through our audio gallery of inspiration, thank you and goodbye.